Hi everyone, I'm Kyle Dyer and welcome to Colorado Inside Out on this Friday, March 22nd, the first Friday of spring. And we end this week with Ken Buck stepping down from 9 years of representing the 4th Congressional District in Washington, while fellow Colorado Representative Joe Neguse becomes the new Assistant Democratic Leader in the U.S. House, which makes him the highest ranking member of our state's congressional delegation since the 1930s. There is a lot of other happenings this week to talk about, so let me introduce you to our panel. We have Patty Calhoun, founder and editor of Westward, Tyrone Glover, leading civil rights and criminal defense attorney here in Denver, Sage Nauman, a conservative commentator, columnist, and strategist, and Ian Thomas Tafoya, a community leader and former candidate for Denver mayor. This week, semi-automatic weapons were again a topic of conversation at the state capitol, a 14-hour conversation. Before lawmakers, the question is, should Colorado ban the sale and purchase of certain types of assault weapons, Patty?
Well, this is a conversation that came up last year, didn't make it as far as this one is going. But we have to remember, we are heading into the 25th anniversary of Columbine next April. The 25th anniversary of that school shooting, which has so defined a generation, and we are still having these gun debates. This one, obviously, we're going to have again. It made it out of the committee with a few amendments, moving it down to possession or sale down to a petty offense, which means it doesn't have to go to another committee hearing. It can go straight to the full House. Will it make it out of the House? Possibly. It was a big win for Elizabeth Epps and Tim Hernandez, but once it hits the Senate, it's Tom Sullivan, who has definite issues with it, and his son died in the Aurora Theater shooting. So there's so many different nuances to this bill that people are fighting, and then even if it makes it out and is signed, Rocky Mountain gun owners, and they're not alone, are already threatening suits because it runs up against the Supreme Court decision in the New York case.
Which I'm sure you're watching.
Absolutely. And that decision in Bruin, which is already starting to cause issues for SCOTUS, trying to interpret a bunch of these laws under this new historical standard, it's really up in the air as to how they're potentially going to interpret this. So there are certainly hurdles, but I think the community sentiment and the will of the people is they want to see common sense gun reform. This idea that lawful gun owners and lawful gun dealers can keep these weapons of war out of the hands of people who want to commit mass shootings, it's just not happening. And we are at the 25th anniversary of Columbine. It's time to do something. And so regardless of whether you're up against obstacles with the Senate, the courts, the governor, this is the will of the people, and our lawmakers are doing what they were sent there to do.
But Sage, there were a lot of people that spoke out and were there on this week, it was a Tuesday, to testify against this bill.
Yeah, you mentioned that it was 14 hours of testimony, and that's with a hard cutoff, and from my understanding, about 60 people still online wanting to testify, which is no surprise. The gun bills always bring out really the most amount of people, really any bill we see at the state capitol. We have the debate on guns every few years, and as a conservative, I think people can imagine where I stand on it. I'm against banning assault weapons. With that being said, I think that it's important to realize that there have been bipartisan efforts in the past. A few years ago, we had a school safety grant program that we put $50 million into that was created during the budget process. And $50 million was very quickly eaten up by districts across this state. Things like security cameras, metal detectors, things like that. Things that I think both parties can agree on and get through. And in the past, Republicans have tried to put more money into that grant program because we thought it was successful and districts had asked for more. And it's been something that's been shot down. And one last note on Governor Polis. It's a question of political capital when it comes down to Governor Polis. If he wants to sign it, if he wants to veto it, it's a question of whether he wants to spend his political capital doing that.
From the very top, with the president in the in the State of the Union, he's calling for an assault weapons ban. From the very grassroots, my own godson, who I marched to the Capitol with East High students who are over it. Last night, I was over at Hamilton Middle School, where I went to middle school, and I remember being in the first lockdown during Columbine. We got on the buses. We got locked down on the buses. Our parents had to come get us. And since then, I've been a teacher practicing lockdowns. I've had to practice lockdowns in the government where I had a button that I could push under the table. I've worked on large events where we're constantly concerned about this. People can't go to the grocery store. Clearly, we need more work. I would support more of these programs getting funding that people are talking about. But at the end of the day, we are funding all these other programs, but yet the shootings are still happening. I'm going to side with what the best politicians in our country right now are asking for, and that's the president, we're going to go for it.
There are a lot of issues at the state capitol that have people feeling very strongly on both sides. We're going to talk about a couple of them right now, and I'm going to start with you, Tyrone.
Yeah, and hopefully one of those issues that is non-controversial and maybe is put to bed by the time this airs is excited delirium, finally getting banned off the books. We actually have local police departments that no longer have this as part of their nomenclature. But it does, I think, represent a very positive step forward in police accountability, getting rid of this junk science that has been used as not only a sword, but a shield for excessive force cases, from George Floyd to Elijah McClain. We can finally, I think, start implementing good policy, good training, and I think a really significant step in that right direction is getting rid of excited delirium. Science has been used historically, as a weapon to advance discriminatory agendas. This idea that the First Amendment somehow should protect institutions, as was argued, from accountability, I think is just misguided.
There's also a hearing next week for Senate Bill 159, which calls for Colorado to stop issuing new oil and gas drilling permits in 6 years. And Sage, this week, Common Sense Institute came out with a report and said if this were to happen in Colorado, it would be economic catastrophe for our state.
Yeah, so I worked at the state capitol when the legislature passed Senate Bill 181. And I remember being in the room when Governor Polis announced that the oil and gas wars were over. With basically the recreation of the COGCC. And at the time we laughed about that because we were like, there's no way this is the end. We know that more is going to keep coming. And sure enough, here we are talking about ending issuing of new permits in 6 years. I think that when we're talking about climate change policy, when we're talking about trying to protect our environment, it's important that we understand the real-world implications of energy policy. And the fact is that we don't have any sort of a plan for complete 100% renewable energy in our state or in our country right now. We don't have the ability to flip the switch and all of a sudden say, now we're 100% renewable. We're also still debating whether or not we should have nuclear in the state, which I think would be essential if we were to try to do any kind of transition over. Ending our oil and gas drilling would not only just be catastrophic for those who are working in the industry, the trickle-down effect of that would, as the Common Sense Institute says, it would be catastrophic for everyone. You're talking higher prices across the board. You're talking having to import energy from other places. It's really just a terrible idea, in my opinion. But I don't think that bill's going to succeed. I really hope it wouldn't, seeing as that supposedly the oil and gas wars are over.
Well, first of all, I want to say I hope that they sign the bill and move forward on the excited delirium. This is something that our communities share. We want to see accountability and we want to see safety when the police show up. Secondly, I want to say that we're over. The oil and gas wars are over. It's time for just transition, and everybody agrees with that. We've put the money into it at a national level. I chaired the state's Environmental Justice Task Force, where oil and gas representatives, including the pipe fitters, voted for just transition for workers in the oil and gas sector. We are drilling for greed, not need, exporting a gross amount of what it is, of the products out and even out of our country. And as a result, the pollution remains. And I was there at the press conference. I actually was there when they signed the bill and said the oil and gas war is over, and I'm in agreement. We put forward a lot of common sense legislation. I even got delayed by COVID in asking for a charter amendment to ban oil and gas exploration in Denver. Because guess what, everybody? People think Weld County, Adams County, even with strong regulation, is now the #1 producer of oil and gas from a county perspective in Colorado. And as a result of Arapahoe County and those, they are creeping to us. I fear what that implications are for the Black and brown communities in Green Valley Ranch in particular, who I don't know if they own their mineral rights. We know our air quality is in severe issues. We haven't met our standards. It is time for us to take, again, leadership from the federal government, who have led on withdrawals of oil and gas from our public lands. And what people won't talk about is the fact that for 30 or 40 years, these wells will continue to produce. So even if we stop issuing new permits, all of them that are in the backlog are going to continue to produce. And if we're exporting, that means we have enough for the people of Colorado.
Okay.
If I could just add one thing before we go to Patty. The idea that everyone is asking for this simply isn't true. We've had ballot initiatives on the ballot here in Colorado. It's been rejected. That was setbacks, which we now have through the COGCC. Polling shows that Coloradans overwhelmingly support our energy industry. It's simply not true that the people are simply asking to get rid of oil and gas in the state. That is not correct.
Transition doesn't mean ban right off the bat.
Well, this bill would.
Okay, thank you.
I think we can safely say that Coloradans want to be healthy. They want to have energy, and that's a real challenge. When you think about what our citizen legislature has to take on every year and what they have to become expert in, often very, very quickly, when you think about oil and gas and climate change and the new energies, and then you switch over to excited delirium, you have cases like poor Elijah McClain, who is walking down a street. He's accosted by cops. He's manhandled. This is a little kid. He's not a big guy. He is not overpowering all the police, but they wind up using the excited delirium that he is suddenly has superpowers as basically an excuse for killing him. So, but you've got these different issues. Everyone has to become experts on all the time. So I think mostly what citizens can do, read up on everything they can, especially as we head to the November elections, where we're going to find so many of these issues on the ballot.
All right, thanks, Patty. Hundreds of people have already signed a petition in hopes of keeping the building that housed a longtime jazz club in Denver standing. The current owners of El Chapultapec say the building has structural issues and is considering demolition. Sage, this building is at 19th and Market. It's been there since, 1890?
Yeah, it has been around for a very long time. As somebody who is very passionate about historic preservation and preserving old buildings, this is something that definitely piques my interest. One of the things that I have a big issue with is every single time there seems to be a developer who comes in and either purchases some sort of old building, there is this last-minute effort to try to immediately get it designated so the developer can't do that. Here are the problems I have with that. First of all, the building we're talking about here is, if you look back at some of the articles that were written when the building was originally purchased just 2-3 years ago, it seems like all of the internal structure, most of the historical part of the interior has been removed. The exterior doesn't particularly have anything exciting from an architectural standpoint. There's a really awesome sign, which the Montfort said that they want to actually keep there for their new building. People need to realize the cost that goes into rehabbing these sort of buildings. It's not just a matter of let's get it to where it was 20 years ago. You have to bring it up to current code. A lot of times it costs a heck of a lot more money to bring something up to the standards where it needs to be than to just tear it down and rebuild. And we're not talking about a couple $100,000 more or even $1 million more. Sometimes it's millions and millions more dollars to do that. And I think sometimes people have this misunderstanding about what it takes to rehab these old buildings. And we can't just expect developers to foot the bill just so we can keep old buildings around. That's just simply not the way it's going to work. It's going to keep developers out, and that's not what we want. We're going to have more vacant buildings in the city of Denver.
Ian, you are the Vice Chair of Historic Denver.
Yes, and we are proud to be bringing this forward with community members, as you were mentioning. A couple things I want to address off the bat. This didn't just come out of nowhere. We've been working with the Montforts for years, where they had made commitments about trying to protect this building. We're grateful for the great articles that have been written. I'm learning new things myself, like mariachis in the Denver Westward being played into the space. I think a piece that I really want people to understand is we've made huge progress in Denver to add cultural heritage to one of the reasons why we can protect a space or a place and tell a story. And it's La Raza Park, La Alma Park, El Chapultapec. These are the people who helped to build this city, who have an important role to play in the city, and who are being gentrified out of the city. So us coming together to protect our heritage together with musicians and everybody else, I'm hopeful we'll reach a deal, and I think the Montforts are too.
Okay, Patty.
Well, it's interesting that this came up right before the Esquire Theater, for example, Hesdale Esquire's closing. The building, a lot of it's going to be preserved. The marquee is going to be preserved. No one wants to run a movie theater there, so that's not going to happen. It'll be retail and residential. El Chapultapec hasn't been a jazz club for almost 4 years now. The family that ran it, Jerry Kranz's daughters, didn't want to run it anymore. In December 2020, it closed. The big challenge there was it was rented to no good Nick Valente Corleone, who wound up taking out structural braces, without any permitting. So there is no question. The building itself probably can't be saved as a building, but you could save the walls, and that's been done in several places in Denver. And if you want to show people what Denver used to look like, what our culture used to look like, where this city has gone, if you save those walls and build behind it, I think you could create a real win-win for Denver. We don't want to lose all of our heritage to more bland bars.
And there's a really good history lesson penned by Patty Calhoun in Westward.
And I'm getting more every day on that.
It's so fast. It's a great article, really great article. I highly recommend it. Tyrone.
Yeah, I think we have to preserve the soul of our city. And I mean, when I moved out here a couple of decades ago now at this point, that was one of the first places I went, right? It wasn't the sort of highfalutin fancy places. I had read about the Peck and I wanted to go check it out. I would take, a lesson from some of our neighbors on the coast who've overdeveloped their city centers and eliminated much of sort of the culture that we see. And as the sort of younger generations call it, the cities are now sort of cooked and no longer interesting, and it's just these sort of trendy bars, which I like as much as the next person. But you really do need to make efforts to preserve what is the culture of Denver. And I see the Peck as those kinds of places right outside of this studio in 5 Points with the rich African-American jazz history. We need to preserve that stuff, even if it doesn't always make economic sense. It is something that I think culturally will resonate for years and decades to come.
Okay.
I would just add one more piece of information, Patty, which is I got off the phone before this in preparation, and our engineers, our experts of Historic Denver say, foundations are solid. Yes, there are repairs that need to be made, but we believe that much of that building, not just a few walls, can be saved.
I'm ready for a compromise, but it cannot become an outdoor patio.
La Raza published a report this week about Denver Public Schools, which is Colorado's largest school district. The report shows barrier after barrier keeping Hispanic and Latino students from excelling, and those students equate to more than half of all DPS kids. Ian, the superintendent, said the findings are painful, the gaps are persistent, and change is on the way.
Yeah, first of all, I want to say I really appreciate you acknowledging that. I want to also thank the community members with the Latino Education Council who worked diligently on this. I think what happens in public policy all the time is we know these things, our communities know these things, and then decision makers say, oh, well, we got to go spend resources trying to figure it out, catalog it. It's data. What's good about this is it tells a rich history of our communities, barriers that we face, and also opportunities. I think things that are really clear to me off the bat. We have more work to do to support teachers. We have more work to do to support curriculum change. So we've worked at the state level in order to have that change. Clearly, we need public transportation. I think what we see is segregation. It's not really truly school choice if you can't get there and you have to have a nanny or your mom has to stay at home. It wasn't like that when I went to school, and that also is contributing to our climate and our air quality and our traffic problems. Everyone at 2, 3 o'clock trying to go get their kids. I'm hopeful, and I think together a new office can partner with the Black Excellent Office and also in DPS, and we can see a movement forward for everybody. Because at the end of the day, we want all of our children to succeed. We want our teachers and working families to be treated fairly, and this report gives us a roadmap to do it, and we have leaders who are committed.
They do seem committed, yes.
What was important about this study is it wasn't just sloganeering, it was real documentation. When you talk about the history, you really got the numbers. You saw how bad things have been, and it was released 65 years after the walkouts from West High School because of how students were treated there. And my reporter, Chris Perez, had gone, and he said the fight was over a student whose teacher mispronounced his name, Perez. And you just think how much things have changed, but how far we still have to go. So good for the DPS taking this seriously. Now we have to see how seriously it goes on.
And this was a tremendous effort and an impressive report. The thing I love about it is there's action items, right? We're not just sort of recounting the history and identifying the issues. During some movements, I've gotten questions like, what can we do? What can we do? What can we do? The great thing about this report is like, this is what we can do, and this is when we need to do it. It just is, I think, now going to take our sort of community stakeholders coming together and committing to these recommendations and figuring out how to put them into action. But I was very, very impressed, and it makes me optimistic, always cautiously optimistic about the future and our ability to execute on all of this.
Sage, last word.
Yeah, I think that members of that community can speak better than I can to the issues that they've been facing, and it's a disaster, and it has been. We've talked about DPS here so many times it's hard to count, and their failures to take care of the students, especially those who need it the most. And DPS isn't the only one. There are other districts as well that have these issues, but DPS seems to be the one who always makes the headlines. Education is supposed to be the great equalizer. It's supposed to be the opportunity for, no matter what income level you come from, what your background is, our education system should be able to give you the opportunity to succeed in our society. And today, it is not doing that in the state of Colorado. And I think it's important that regardless of what side of the aisle you're on, obviously we're going to have big disagreements over things like school choice and how to fix these problems, but there's not enough attention paid to it. There's a lot of articles written, don't get me wrong, but this isn't the kind of thing you hear people talking about on the streets. And this is one of the worst issues our state and our nation faces today, the fact that we're leaving behind generations of students every single year. And after COVID, it's only gotten worse. And so absolutely it needs to be addressed, and I'm glad people are really doing the hard work of getting the data together.
Now it is time for our panel to go through some of the highs and the lows of this week. Let's start with a low point so we can end on a happy note. Patty?
Well, last week when you were taping, I was careening along Pena Boulevard in the blizzard to get to the airport, where my flight actually took off miraculously. Good for the city council people who did vote to continue looking at the expansion of Pena Boulevard. Bad that when you are DIA still, the train replacements have not come in quickly enough. You can really get stuck there for a long time, as I did even when there were very few flights taking off.
Tyrone?
And to follow on with our discussion about the PEC, I want to highlight the Curious Theater Company, another, I think, very unique Denver institution, brings in lots of bold acts, gives opportunities to lots of local talent. I just read that they are expecting a $250,000 shortfall and are going to have some real issues with funding by July. So I include that as one of those unique Denver institutions that is deserving of saving. And it's just, I think, unfortunate that they're having these issues and this trouble.
I read that as well. Yep. Sage?
My disappointment of the week, and it's kind of been the last few weeks looking at the state legislature, is some of the bills that we see that are attacking school choice, and specifically charter schools in the state and alternative education options. We see the State Board of Education recently adopted a rule which is basically going to tell 3,000 students that are using a hybrid online program that they can no longer be using it. We've seen the legislature go through bills that are seeming to crack down on charter schools when charter schools seem to be really the only option for a lot of parents who are struggling in failing districts. I think that these things have traditionally been usually bipartisan efforts. Charter schools were bipartisan here in Colorado, and it's unfortunate to see the winds change on that the other direction.
Actually, my disappointment is Pena Boulevard going 7-6, not really thinking about a future where the continued expansion of our airport is a gas guzzler directly tied to Suncor. And we can't get a handle of that if we're going to continue to widen lanes and the impacts on communities. We've had research that's been released that, again, we already knew, fighting I-70, now around 270, it was in the Hill nationally, that these black and brown communities, or any community, but predominantly these communities in Colorado, are being exposed to more air pollution. So we're going to put more lanes, more high-speed, or more trucks, all of it is going to have harm to our communities in the long run. And I want to see a larger transportation analysis done throughout the region. We are working with CDOT on some cool things through my day job on that, where we can use cell phone data. We got to get into that level of detail to understand where people are moving, and what better time than in this new paradigm shift after we're not working and driving into the city every single day, every single one of us.
All right, now let's go to something that's positive that you saw.
Well, I'm glad Ian's going to give me a ride next time I go to the airport. But aside from that, the freedom of the press belongs to those who own them. And Colorado Community Media publisher Linda Shapley, it's a nonprofit consortium of local papers. They went out and bought a press when the Pueblo printing press shut down. And they are going to print not just their own papers, but at reasonable cost, little papers across Colorado that have been shut out of the market because they cannot afford to print. So it's an amazing move. Colorado Community Media, you might have one of those papers in your neighborhood. Congratulate them.
That is cool. That's
It's
great.
really cool.
Yeah.
So 8-year-old me wants to go with Wolverines, but I'm actually going to give a shout out and sort of bookend things to my law school classmate, Joe Neguse. It's such an impressive accomplishment and something that all Coloradans can be proud of, at 39 being the highest ranking member of the state's congressional delegation since the 1930s. I'm really proud of you, Primo. Keep doing great work.
Okay.
The good thing of the week for me is watching one politician out of many who've decided to bend the knee to King Trump, Vice President Mike Pence, former Vice President Mike Pence, say that he is not endorsing Donald Trump for president. A small move, probably won't have much impact, but I appreciate it nonetheless, because other politicians who desire to be in good graces of Donald Trump despite all the previous comments about what a threat he is to our country or to the Republican Party, have bent the knee, and he didn't. So I appreciate that, as small as it may be.
Well, I'll piggyback a little bit on that community media. I used to be a columnist in Life on Capitol Hill in West Wash Park, Environment with Ian. Love local media. I think that's great. And also, I was going to say Wolverines, because who doesn't like biodiversity, the fact that we're bringing them back. People should also know that bison are also just coming on their own in the northwestern corner of Colorado, and as an Indigenous person, that brings me such joy.
Well, my highs of the week are the millions of dollars granted to some Colorado nonprofits this week from Mackenzie Scott, the ex-wife of Amazon founder Jeff Bezos, who has said she will give half of her divorce money to charities. The awards granted this week are between $1 and $2 million each. So congrats to, I'm going to read the short list right here, Colorado Fiscal Investments, Servicios de la Raza, Women's Bean Project, Moonshot Adventures, Hope House Colorado, Lifespan Local, Grasp, and Intercambio. Just think of all the additional amazing work these groups can do to make the lives and the futures of Coloradans even better. Thank you, panel, for making all of us better and smarter with all of your insight this week. We really appreciate it. And thanks to all of you at home who are watching, or to those of you listening on our podcast on Spotify. I'm Kyle Dyer. I will see you next week here on PBS 12.
PBS 12 believes in the power of original, local programming. Help us bring more shows, like the one you just watched, by donating at pbs12.org/program support today.